a spare and the most delightful little girl. If only he were not twice my age and more of a father figure to me. It is quite distressing to imagine running my tongue over his chest and down to his manhood as I had attempted with dear Robert. Perhaps Sir Eliot would be similarly disgusted with my wantonness and— Oliver snapped the book close and tilted his head to the sky. Bloody hell! She was young if she considered the baronet, who couldn't be a day over 50 years, old enough to be her father, and her dead husband had been called Robert. That should narrow down Oliver's search. What the hell am I saying? He had no interest in discovering the identity of the author. To what purpose? He couldn't return her diary with any explanation that would not cause her great distress. Even if he lied and said he hadn't read the pages, her mortification would be great indeed. Nor could he leave it where he found it on the grass, under the cypress tree by the gazebo, for another unsuspecting soul to stumble upon her lusty and scandalous musings. Perhaps he should simply burn it. He glanced toward where he'd found the damning journal, his gaze assessing each young lady who strolled by. None looked anxious, and a few gave him inviting smiles, no doubt hearing wedding bells, since it had been made known he was on the hunt for a wife. He was 32 and was quite bored. The usual debauchery that privileged gentlemen of his ilk enjoyed no longer seemed exciting. The pleasure gardens, the reckless racing, scandalous pursuits, and even the rousing debates in Parliament hardly moved him any more. There was an emptiness in his soul he couldn't understand, and nothing of late seemed to fill the void. He had bid his last mistress adieu over 8 months past, and been without a lover since. Oliver had seen no point in searching for another, when his last 3 had left him so uninspired and frustrated. His mother had even clucked and urged him to take the waters and bath to cure his ennui. It was as if the world were painted in shades of grey, and he was waiting for a ray of something, anything, to burst through the bleak dreariness and inspire him to simply feel. One of his closest friends, the Duke of Basil, had taken the plunge into matrimony several months past, and the man seemed at peace and happy with his new duchess. The arrow of envy that had pierced his heart whenever he spied them together had stunned Oliver. He had never begrudged a man more in his life. The Duke had found love with Elizabeth Armstrong, an American heiress, and had shocked society. His Grace also seemed content and not likely to procure himself a mistress, which meant the Duke's American satisfied his darker cravings. And Oliver had some notion of what they were. After all, they had both shared Lady Wimbledon for a night or two, at the same time. Oliver wanted a similar happiness. In fact, he quite hungered for a wife, and eventually children. That need was tempered by his keen desire to find a lady who would appreciate all his desires, even the ones a few of his mistresses had labelled as depraved and shocking. That had been his main reason for not rushing recklessly into matrimony. His father had taught him at the age of 16 that a wife must never be subjected to his base and darker urges. Mistresses were designed for rough and carnal tupping, and it was to be expected that he should have 2 women to sate all his needs. Except Oliver did not want that. He'd seen how it had torn up his mother and put a strain on his parents' marriage. But this was a notion that would have sent his father to an early grave, had he not already passed a few years ago. Oliver stood, the book gripped lightly in his hand, and strolled down to the lakeside. The waters were blessedly empty, as most of the guests were playing croquet or already indulging in a light luncheon on the freshly mowed lawns. A few boats had been prepared for rowing, and he untied the ropes tethering one and climbed aboard. After securing the diary on the inside of his superfine jacket, he grabbed the oars and propelled himself farther out onto the lake. Once he was a safe distance from the shoreline, he stopped rowing and allowed the boat to drift at its own speed atop the placid waters. Though he had decided to destroy the diary, he would first consume its pages. Interest had taken hold of his mind, and he wanted to read as much as possible.